Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Podcast with Guest from the Past. I'm your host, Arthur, and folks, I have to tell you, today is absolutely incredible. I never actually believed this was possible. We talk about the gate and the possibilities, but seeing is believing, right? And today we have a character with us we never imagined we'd meet outside of history books, someone truly legendary. It's genuinely an honor. We have with us the legendary Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra VII. Welcome, Your Majesty, to our podcast studio.
Arthur, you say this is incredible? You speak of gates and possibilities as if they are new concepts. My world was full of gates, to Rome, to the east, to the very favor of the gods themselves. But this is a crossing of a different kind. You are Arthur, and this studio is where you gather minds and voices? I confess the passage was disorienting. You expected me?
Yes, Your Majesty, I am Arthur. And yes, this studio is precisely that. A place where we gather minds and voices, though I assure you, none as extraordinary as yours today. And expected? Well, we dared to hope, but to see you here, it's beyond any expectation. The passage through the gate, as we call it, can be disorienting, I understand. You have traveled across millennia to be here. What is the very first thing that strikes you, looking around this place, so utterly different from your world?
What strikes me first? So much. This light, for instance. It feels like midday sun, yet I see no windows, no torches, no lamps fed by oil. Where does such steady brilliance emanate? And these surfaces, so smooth, so regular, not stone, not wood as I know it. What substances are these? They seem lifeless, yet shaped with a precision that speaks of immense craft. And these objects before us, these metallic fruits on stands, they seem to listen. You say this place gathers voices? Do these devices capture them, like scribes capturing words on papyrus, but without the hand? It is a quiet power, this place, unlike the thunder of Rome's legions or the murmurs of the court, yet potent in its own way. It feels contained, as if the air itself is different.
That is a fascinating observation, Your Majesty. The light, yes, it comes from electricity. It is a different kind of flame, one that doesn't consume fuel like oil. And the surfaces, they are made from materials we synthesize and shape with great precision. And yes, you are exactly right about these metallic fruits. They are microphones, and they are indeed capturing our voices right now, recording them without the need for scribes or papyrus. It's a quiet power, as you say, a way to preserve and share thoughts across great distances and time. It is contained, yes, designed to capture sound and minimize distraction. But speaking of power and challenges, you ruled Egypt during a time of immense pressure. Rome was a growing force, and maintaining Egypt's independence must have been incredibly difficult. What would you say was the single greatest challenge you faced as queen during that turbulent period?
The greatest challenge? It was not hunger, though the Nile's floods could be cruel. Nor was it the plotting of rivals in my own court, though that was a constant viper at the heel. No, Arthur, the greatest challenge was always Rome. Imagine a beast endlessly hungry, its shadow stretching across the known world. They spoke of republic, then of empire, but their true language was power, conquest, and wealth. Egypt, my Egypt, rich in grain and history, was a prize they coveted, maintaining our sovereignty against that relentless appetite. It required delicate steps, alliances that shifted like desert sands, understanding their internal feuds, using their ambitions against them. You had to be fluid, adaptable. A lioness, yes, but also a serpent. To be swallowed whole was the easiest fate. The challenge was to dance on the very edge of their power without falling in.
That is a powerful description, Your Majesty, of Rome as a hungry beast and the necessity of being both a lioness and a serpent. It truly paints a picture of the immense pressure you faced. Can you share with us a specific moment, a particular decision or negotiation, where you felt you were truly dancing on the edge of their power, trying to prevent Egypt from being swallowed whole?
A specific moment, you ask? There were many such nights, Arthur, when the fate of my kingdom felt balanced on a knife's edge. But perhaps the most daring dance was when I first sought out Julius Caesar in Alexandria. My brother, Ptolemy, and his advisors had driven me from the city, and Rome's legions were already present, supposedly to settle our dynastic squabble, but truly, I believe, to assess Egypt's weakness. To approach Caesar directly was a risk. His camp was hostile to my cause, guarded by those who wished me ill. Yet he was the key. He held Rome's immediate might. I arranged to be delivered to him. Concealed, yes, like precious cargo, bypassing the watchful eyes of my enemies, and even for a time, his own guards. To place myself in his tent, vulnerable, relying solely on my wits and presence to sway the man who represented the hungry beast. That was the dance. To persuade him that my claim was just, that Egypt under my rule would be a more valuable ally, or perhaps a less troublesome problem than under my brother. It was a gamble where the slightest misstep could mean not just my own life, but the swift end of Egypt's independence. It required the serpent's cunning to reach him and the lioness's courage to stand before him, stripped of all but my royal will. That moment in Caesar's presence was the precipice.
That is an absolutely incredible story, Your Majesty. To bypass guards, enemies, to place yourself, a queen, in such a vulnerable position, relying only on your presence and words, the courage, as you say, of a lioness, combined with the serpent's cunning to get there. It truly underscores the stakes. So, you are in Caesar's tent, you stand before him. What happens next? How did the conversation unfold? What was his immediate reaction, and how did you feel in that moment, having taken such an immense gamble?
His reaction? At first, surprise, Arthur, perhaps intrigue. I had, after all, arrived in a most unconventional manner. The tent, moments before filled with the low hum of soldiers and advisors outside, became very still. I stood before him, not as a refugee, but as the Queen of Egypt, despite my clandestine arrival. I made sure he saw that. My clothing was simple for the journey, but my bearing was not. I spoke not of my brother's perfidy, or only briefly. Instead, I spoke of Egypt, of its history, its wealth, its strategic importance. I spoke of the stability I could offer, the resources that a loyal and well-managed Egypt could provide Rome, compared to a kingdom torn by internal strife under Ptolemy. I presented myself not as a supplicant, but as a political equal, offering a partnership that benefited both sides. It was a bold assertion to make to the most powerful man in Rome, from a position of apparent weakness. And how did I feel? Every fiber of my being was a taut string, ready to snap. My mind raced, calculating his expressions, weighing every word I uttered. Fear was a cold stone in my stomach, yes, but overlaid with an intense focus. This was the culmination of everything. To show weakness was to invite ruin. I had to project strength, intelligence, and absolute conviction. It was the most terrifying, exhilarating gamble of my life.
That is truly gripping, Your Majesty. To feel that combination of terror and exhilaration with the fate of your kingdom hanging in the balance, one can only imagine. So, you've presented yourself, you've spoken of Egypt's importance and the stability you could offer. How did Caesar react to your words? What was the immediate outcome of that incredibly brave meeting?
Caesar. He listened, Arthur. That was the first thing. Many powerful men speak over others or wait impatiently for their turn. But he listened. His expression was unreadable at first, like stone, worn smooth by the Tiber. But as I spoke of Egypt's grain, its ports, its position as a gateway between the Mediterranean and the riches of the East, I saw a flicker. Not of simple greed, no. Caesar was too complex for that. It was a flicker of calculation, of strategic thinking. He saw the value, yes, but he was weighing the risk, the effort required to subdue Ptolemy's faction against the rewards of a stable, cooperative Egypt under my rule. The immediate outcome was recognition. He accepted my claim as the rightful ruler, or at least the claimant whose cause he would now champion. His soldiers were sent to reinforce my position, to engage with those who opposed me. It was not an instant victory, no. There was still much fighting in Alexandria, the Alexandrian War, as your histories might call it. But standing there, in that tent, having spoken my truth and presented my case, and seeing Caesar's nod, his acceptance of my presence and my words as legitimate, it was the first step. The key had turned in the lock. The edge of the precipice held, for that moment at least.
That is truly remarkable, Your Majesty. Seeing Caesar's nod, the key turning in the lock, as you put it. It makes that moment incredibly vivid. And yes, your histories do indeed speak of the conflict that followed, the Alexandrian War. So, that battle was won, you were restored to your throne. But Rome's influence didn't disappear. In fact, it seemed to only grow stronger, and your life became even more intertwined with Roman power, particularly through your relationship with Mark Antony. Can you speak about the challenges of governing after Caesar, and how you navigated the complex political landscape of the Roman civil wars and your alliance with Antony? What was it like trying to steer Egypt's course during that incredibly volatile time?
Governing after Caesar, it was like trying to pilot a Nile barge through a storm of unprecedented fury. Caesar's death did not bring peace to Rome, as some perhaps naively hoped. No, it unleashed chaos. The beast fractured into warring heads, Octavian in the west, Antony in the east, others vying for power. Egypt, perched precariously between these titans, became a prize, a potential ally, a granary to feed their armies. My task was to ensure we were the ally, the necessary partner, not the conquered province. The alliance with Antony. It was born of necessity, Arthur. He controlled the Roman East, the territories bordering Egypt. To survive, I needed Rome, or at least a significant part of it, to see Egypt not as a possession to be taken, but as a strong, independent kingdom with whom they could cooperate. Antony offered that possibility. He understood the East, the older ways, perhaps better than the colder, calculating Octavian. We shared ambitions, yes, a vision perhaps of a different balance of power in the world. But steering Egypt's course was fraught with peril. Every Roman victory, every Roman defeat sent ripples of danger towards Alexandria, providing grain for their legions, ships for their fleets, gold from our treasuries. These were demands I met, calculating how much was necessary to maintain the alliance without crippling my own kingdom or appearing too weak. Balancing the needs of Egypt with the insatiable requirements of a Roman triumvir was a constant, exhausting tightrope walk. You hoped Antony would prevail, securing a future where Egypt could breathe. But the struggle was relentless, and the stakes were nothing less than the end of the Ptolemaic line, the end of my kingdom's ancient freedom.
A constant, exhausting tightrope walk. That image, Your Majesty, perfectly captures the immense pressure you must have felt, and you spoke of the struggle being relentless, with the stakes being the very end of your kingdom's ancient freedom. This period, of course, ultimately led to the confrontation with Octavian. From your perspective, what were the strategic considerations during those final years leading up to the pivotal Battle of Actium? What were the hopes and the fears as that final clash approached?
Actium. That name still carries the taste of ash. Strategic considerations? By then, the world had narrowed to two colossal figures, Antony, bound to the east, and Octavian, consolidating his power in the west. Antony's strength lay in the resources of the east, its armies, its ships, and in Egypt's wealth, our grain, our navy, my support. Octavian commanded Italy, the heartland, the legions forged in civil war, and a relentless propaganda machine that painted Antony as a Roman gone native, enslaved by an exotic queen. Our hope, Arthur, was to win decisively at sea, to break Octavian's power before he could fully mobilize his legions on land. To control the seas meant controlling the flow of grain, of troops, of everything. Antony was a seasoned general, respected by his men. We believed that if we could inflict a crushing naval defeat, the balance would tip, alliances would shift, and Octavian's carefully built power base might crumble. The fear was the mirror image of the hope. The fear was that Octavian's organization, his cold, calculated efficiency, would overcome Antony's sometimes unpredictable brilliance. The fear was of Rome's sheer, overwhelming power, its ability to absorb anything in its path. The fear, for me, was not merely personal defeat, but the absolute eradication of Egypt's last vestiges of independence. Should Octavian win, I knew he would not rule through alliance or partnership. He would rule as master, and Egypt would become merely another province, stripped of its ancient identity, its wealth flowing solely to Rome. Every ship we built, every soldier we trained, every coin spent was a gamble on that hope, a ward against that fear. The air before Actium was thick with it, the grim determination of men preparing for battle, and the unspoken dread of what awaited if the dice fell against us.
That sense of dread, the gamble on hope against the fear of total loss, it's palpable, Your Majesty. Actium is, of course, etched into history as that final clash. Can you describe what it was like, being there, experiencing that battle unfold, knowing everything hinged upon it? What was the feeling when the tide began to turn?
Actium. The sea was boiling. So many ships, Arthur. Not just ours, painted in the colors of Egypt and the East, sails emblazoned with the emblems of gods, but Octavian's gray, relentless line. The air thrummed with the expectation of death, the smell of pitch, of salt, of fear. The shouts of men, the commands, the low creak of timbers under immense strain. When the clash came, it was not like land battle, neat lines meeting. It was a maelstrom. Ships ramming, oars splintering, the clang of bronze on bronze as marines grappled on decks slippery with blood. Fire arrows arcing through the air, turning ships into flaming pyres. To be there, on my flagship, the Antonia, surrounded by the chaos, the roar of battle echoing across the water. Every nerve was alive, watching, trying to discern victory from defeat in the shifting tangle of ships. When did the tide turn? It wasn't a sudden moment, perhaps, but a dreadful realization that crept in like the fog off the sea. Seeing our ships, once so proud, being overwhelmed, outmaneuvered by Octavian's lighter, swifter vessels. Seeing gaps appear in our line that should not have been there. Hearing the change in the sounds, the cries of the defeated beginning to drown out the roars of aggression. There was a decision made, a terrible decision, to attempt a breakout, to save what ships we could, to live to fight another day, perhaps on land, to leave the main fight. It felt like tearing the heart out of the battle, the feeling, a cold, sick certainty settling in the pit of my stomach. The gamble had failed, the precipice had given way, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than any fear of death, that the ancient freedom of Egypt was likely lost upon those churning waters.
That sense of dread, the gamble on hope against the fear of total loss, it's palpable, Your Majesty. Actium is, of course, etched into history as that final clash. Can you describe what it was like, being there, experiencing that battle unfold, knowing everything hinged upon it? What was the feeling when the tide began to turn?
Actium, the sea was boiling. So many ships, Arthur. Not just ours, painted in the colors of Egypt and the East, sails emblazoned with the emblems of gods, but Octavian's gray, relentless line. The air thrummed with the expectation of death, the smell of pitch, of salt, of fear, the shouts of men, the commands, the low creak of timbers under immense strain. When the clash came, it was not like land battle, neat lines meeting. It was a maelstrom, ships ramming, oars splintering, the clang of bronze on bronze as marines grappled on decks slippery with blood, fire arrows arcing through the air, turning ships into flaming pyres. To be there, on my flagship, the Antonia, surrounded by the chaos, the roar of battle echoing across the water. Every nerve was alive, watching, trying to discern victory from defeat in the shifting tangle of ships. When did the tide turn? It wasn't a sudden moment, perhaps, but a dreadful realization that crept in like the fog off the sea. Seeing our ships, once so proud, being overwhelmed, outmaneuvered by Octavian's lighter, swifter vessels. Seeing gaps appear in our line that should not have been there. Hearing the change in the sounds, the cries of the defeated beginning to drown out the roars of aggression. There was a decision made, a terrible decision, to attempt a breakout, to save what ships we could, to live to fight another day, perhaps on land, to leave the main fight. It felt like tearing the heart out of the battle. The feeling? A cold, sick certainty settling in the pit of my stomach. The gamble had failed. The precipice had given way. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than any fear of death, that the ancient freedom of Egypt was likely lost upon those churning waters.
That description, Your Majesty, of the sea boiling and the terrible certainty settling in, it is incredibly moving, and brings that moment vividly to life. And as you say, the gamble had failed. The precipice gave way. History tells us that you retreated to Alexandria, and eventually Octavian arrived there. That must have been an agonizing period, knowing the end of independence was at hand. Can you speak about those final days in Alexandria? What were your thoughts and feelings as Octavian's forces closed in, and what were the choices you faced in that ultimate moment?
Alexandria, after Actium. It was a city of ghosts, Arthur. The vibrant life that had pulsed through its streets, the energy of a kingdom preparing for battle, it had drained away, replaced by a heavy, suffocating dread. Every wind from the sea seemed to carry the echo of defeat, the scent of approaching conquest. Octavian's legions were methodical, relentless. We knew they were coming. There was no hope of resistance, not truly. The forces that remained were but shadows of their former strength, demoralized, awaiting the inevitable. My thoughts. They were a whirlwind, and yet terribly focused. On my children, their fate. On Egypt, its long history about to be extinguished as a sovereign power. On Antony, his spirit was broken. The man who had been my partner in ambition and love was a ruin. Trying to rally support, to find some path, any crack in the approaching Roman wall, it felt like clutching at smoke. The choices faced? They narrowed, Arthur, with each passing hour. To wait for Octavian to arrive, to be paraded through Rome like a captive queen, a trophy to adorn his triumph? To see my children perhaps spared, but raised as Roman wards, their heritage erased? To submit and watch as Egypt was stripped bare, its temples dishonored, its people made slaves to the new master? No, there was only one choice left that preserved. Not freedom, for that was gone on the waves at Actium, but dignity, to deny Octavian his ultimate prize, to ensure that the last ruler of independent Egypt did not walk in chains before her conqueror. It was a final, agonizing assertion of will in the face of absolute defeat. The fear of what was to come was immense, yes, but the determination to face it on my own terms was stronger, to choose the end rather than have it imposed upon me. That was the only path left on those final heavy days in Alexandria.
Hearing you describe those final days in Alexandria, Your Majesty, and the agonizing choice you made, the determination to choose dignity over being a captive trophy, the weight of that must have been immense. Can you speak about the feeling of making that ultimate decision? What occupied your thoughts in those very last moments, having chosen your own path?
The feeling, Arthur? It was profound. A strange mixture of despair and release. For so long, every breath, every thought, every action was a calculation. A move on the board against Rome, against rivals, against fate itself. Suddenly, the board was overturned. There were no more pieces to move, no more gambits to play. Only the end remained. But even in that, I could choose the manner of my leaving. To deny Octavian the spectacle, to prevent my image, my person, from being dragged through Rome's streets, a symbol of their conquest. That was powerful, a final act of defiance against the beast that had consumed so much. My thoughts in those last moments, they were not of fear, not of pain. They were of Egypt, of the Nile, flowing unchanged for millennia, of the temples standing against the sand and time, of the millions who had lived and died under the double crown, and the knowledge that this lineage, this ancient kingdom, was about to be swallowed into the vast gray anonymity of the Roman Empire. There was sorrow, deep as the tomb, for what was lost, for the future that would never be. But beneath the sorrow, there was also a fierce pride that I, Cleopatra, the last of my line, had fought until the very end, that I had stared into the eyes of Caesar and Antony, of Octavian, and for a time held Rome at bay, that I chose the end of my story rather than letting my conqueror write it for me. It was the heaviest choice, yes, but in its finality, there was a terrible, quiet peace. The struggle was over.
Your Majesty, hearing you describe those last moments, that terrible, quiet peace, it is incredibly powerful. The weight of that choice to ensure dignity even in defeat. It truly brings home the stakes you faced. You've spoken so vividly about your life, your struggles against Rome, your efforts to protect Egypt. Now, looking forward across the millennia, how do you feel about how history, perhaps especially in the world I come from, has remembered you? Does the image that has come down to us match the queen, the woman you knew yourself to be.
How history remembers me. It is a strange thought, Arthur, to be looked upon across so vast a chasm of time. I have caught glimpses, heard whispers, in the passage here of the tales that are told, and mostly, they speak of Caesar, of Antony, of love affairs and beauty. They speak of a queen who charmed powerful Romans. They rarely speak of the burden, of the endless days and nights spent calculating, planning, negotiating, of the famine that stalked the land when the Nile was low, of the plots within my own court, the knives hidden beneath cloaks, of the libraries I sought to preserve, the scholars I gathered, the trade routes I fostered, of the simple, constant worry for my people, for their safety, for their future. They see the serpent, yes, the one who reached Caesar, but often forget the lioness, the ruler who fought, tooth and claw, for 30 years to keep Egypt free. They focus on the alliances with Rome, but not the desperate necessity of those alliances, the razor's edge they balanced upon. Does the image match? No, Arthur. It captures a facet, perhaps, the one Rome wished to see, the one that simplified a complex struggle into a Roman narrative of seduction and conquest. It is easier, perhaps, to remember the woman than the queen, the lover than the ruler. But I was a ruler first. My heart beat for Egypt, for its survival, for its ancient glory. The rest was a tool, a strategy, employed for that singular, desperate purpose. So, no, the image that has come down. It is a Roman coin, polished smooth by time, but it does not show the full face of Cleopatra.
That's a powerful distinction, Your Majesty, between the Roman coin and the full face of Cleopatra. It makes perfect sense that history, written so often by the victors, might simplify or even distort the complex reality of a ruler who fought so fiercely for her kingdom's independence. If you could ensure that the people listening now, millennia later, understood just one thing, one crucial aspect of your life or your reign that history has often overlooked or misunderstood, what would that one thing be?
Just one thing, Arthur. How to distill a lifetime of struggle, of hope, of fear into a single drop for minds so far away. If I must choose, let it be this, that I was not merely a woman who loved two powerful Romans. I was the Queen of Egypt. My primary passion, my life's work, my driving force was the survival and flourishing of my kingdom, my people. Every alliance, every negotiation, every risk I took, every hardship I endured was measured against that single purpose. The stories focus on the bedchamber, perhaps, or the barge on the Cydnus, but they miss the endless hours in the council chambers, the careful management of the granaries, the complex diplomacy required to feed my people and keep the Roman wolf from the door. I was a politician, a diplomat, a strategist, a ruler, and every beat of my heart was for Egypt. Understand that, and you understand the true Cleopatra.
That is a profoundly important distinction, Your Majesty, and thank you for emphasizing it so clearly. It's true that the more sensational aspects of history often overshadow the complex realities of governance and the deep commitment rulers have to their people and their land. If your primary passion was the survival and flourishing of Egypt, as you say, beyond the grand political stage, what were some of the more day-to-day, or perhaps less dramatic aspects of ruling that consumed your time and energy? What did it mean, in practice, to be a ruler whose heart beat for Egypt?
The less dramatic aspects, you say? They were often the most consuming, Arthur. Imagine a kingdom that breathes with the rhythm of a single river. The Nile is our lifeblood, but it is also a demanding master. One must constantly oversee the irrigation systems, the canals that carry the precious water to the fields, the management of the granaries, ensuring they are full in times of plenty, distributing wisely when the flood is poor. A hungry people are a restless people, and Egypt's grain fed not only ourselves, but was a vital currency in dealing with Rome. There was the administration of justice, listening to petitions, settling disputes among villagers or merchants. The collection of taxes, ensuring fairness where possible, but also collecting enough to fund the army, the navy, the endless tributes demanded by Rome. The maintenance of our great temples, ensuring the gods were honored, for the favor of the gods was seen as crucial to the flood, to prosperity. I would spend hours with scribes, reviewing reports from different nomes, from the ports, from the borders, understanding the flow of trade, where the spices came from, where the papyrus was sent, the movement of gold from the south. Ensuring the lighthouse of Alexandria was maintained, a beacon guiding ships from across the world. And then there was the upkeep of Alexandria itself, this magnificent city, the center of learning with its great library, meeting with scholars, discussing philosophy, astronomy, medicine, patronizing the arts, hosting foreign dignitaries not just for political talks, but to showcase Egypt's culture and wealth. It was a constant juggling, Arthur. The grand strategy against Rome was the thundercloud on the horizon, but the daily business was the rain that nourishes the land, the careful tending of the soil. One could not survive without the other. My heart beat for Egypt in the grand halls of diplomacy, yes, but also in the simple, vital work of ensuring the granaries were full and the canals ran clear.
Your Majesty, that truly paints a picture of the immense scope of your responsibilities. Hearing about the canals, the granaries, the administration of justice, the maintenance of the temples, the trade routes, the library. It brings home that you weren't just dealing with emperors and battles, but with the very fabric of life for millions. That's a staggering amount of detail and oversight required, alongside the constant thundercloud of Rome you mentioned earlier. How did you carry that weight, that immense responsibility for the daily well-being of your kingdom, while simultaneously fighting for its very survival on the global stage?
How did I carry it? It was not a single stone, Arthur, but a mountain placed upon one's shoulders from dawn until dusk, and often through the night. The weight was immense, yes. The constant worry, the calculations that never ceased, the knowledge that a single misstep could plunge millions into ruin. How does one bear such a burden? You learn to compartmentalize, to feel the fear, the exhaustion, the frustration, but to lock it away when duty calls. To present a calm face to your advisors, a resolute will to your generals, a confident presence to foreign envoys. You cannot afford the luxury of visible doubt. You draw strength from within, yes, but also from what you believe in. From the long line of pharaohs who came before, from the knowledge that you are the guardian of an ancient civilization. You draw strength from the gods, from Isis, who embodies the resilience of Egypt, the power of the feminine, the wisdom to heal and to endure. I sought guidance, not just in scrolls and reports, but in the rituals, in the connection to forces greater than any mortal. And always, always, you remember why you carry the weight. It is for the fertile soil after the flood, for the laughter of children in the villages, for the wisdom held within the library walls. It is for Egypt. That love, that fierce protectiveness for my land and my people, was the anchor in the storm. It was the unbreakable core that allowed me to stand beneath that crushing weight and continue to fight.
That is a truly profound answer, Your Majesty. The image of carrying a mountain of responsibility, yet finding an anchor in your deep love for Egypt and its people, it is incredibly powerful. Given that fierce protectiveness, that driving force for Egypt's survival and flourishing, what were your hopes, your deepest wishes, for the future of your kingdom? What did you dream for Egypt, looking beyond your own lifetime and the immediate struggles?
My hopes for Egypt. They were simple, Arthur, and yet the most complex thing in the world. I dreamed of Egypt, my Egypt, standing free. Not a province, not a vassal, but a sovereign kingdom, its double crown held aloft by its own hand. I wished for its fields to remain green and fertile, for the Nile to flood generously, feeding our people and the world. I wished for Alexandria's library to continue to draw the greatest minds, for knowledge to flourish without the shadow of foreign censors. I hoped our ports would remain busy, drawing wealth from every corner of the sea. I wished for a time when the Roman beast would perhaps find itself preoccupied, divided, or simply content enough not to hunger for us so relentlessly. A time when Egypt could breathe, could look inward and outward with confidence, not constant fear. My deepest wish was for continuity, for the ancient spirit of Egypt to endure, carried forward by strong rulers who remembered their duty to the land and its people. That the work of millennia would not be undone by a generation of defeat. That the resilience woven into the very papyrus and stone would assert itself against any conqueror. These were the dreams that fueled the fight, the vision that made the weight of the mountain bearable. A free, prosperous, eternal Egypt.
That vision, Your Majesty, of a free, prosperous, eternal Egypt, it's incredibly powerful and heartbreaking, knowing the path history eventually took. Hearing your hopes, your dreams for your kingdom, framed against the immense struggle you lived through. It really brings the human cost, the immense weight of your reign, into sharp focus. And we are so grateful that you shared these insights with us today. We've traveled through millennia, from your palace in Alexandria to Caesar's tent, the chaotic waters of Actium, and finally here to our quiet studio. It has been truly extraordinary. Your Majesty, thank you for stepping through the gate, for sharing your story, for giving us this unprecedented glimpse into the life and heart of Cleopatra VII. And to everyone listening, I think we can all agree this has been an episode for the ages. Hearing directly from Queen Cleopatra herself, it's something none of us will ever forget. Thank you for joining us for this truly special edition of Podcast with Guest from the Past. We'll be back soon with another voice from history. Until then, I'm Arthur, signing off.
Arthur, you speak of journeys across millennia. It is indeed extraordinary to sit here in this place of captured voices and speak of sunlit Alexandria, of battles fought on ancient seas. It feels as though the veil between worlds has been lifted, if only for this brief time. Thank you. Thank you for listening, truly listening, to the queen beyond the Roman coin, for asking not just of the love affairs, but of the granaries, of the Nile, of the weight of the double crown. I came, uncertain of what I would find or how I would be perceived, but to know that the echoes of my struggle, the heartbeat for Egypt, can still reach across this immense chasm. Perhaps that is a form of eternity after all. Go well, Arthur, and remember Egypt.